Okay.
Okay.
Do I record on the computer or to the cloud? I guess
I'd say on your computer, but whatever works for you.
Okay, got it.
Okay. Ready?
Yeah,
I'll open it up. Ready for me to go? You have
I think we're good to go. Does the
Oh.
light from the window bother anybody?
I think it's great.
Looks okay. Okay.
All right.
Great.
All right, here we go. 3, 2, 1. Welcome to Intimate Judaism. I'm Rabbi Scott Kahn.
And I'm Talli Rosenbaum. I'm really excited because today we are hosting a panel of guests to discuss LGBTQ and the Orthodox Jewish community.
We're going to have a lot to talk about. We'll do that in just a moment. First, I remind you to check out our website, intimatejudaism.com, for full podcast archives, show notes, a free men's mikveh list, and more. By the way, people have asked me, that does not mean a list of where men can go to the mikveh. It's things men should do when your wife goes to the mikveh at the end of her time of being in Yida. Okay, just wanted to get that out of the way. Intimate Judaism, as you all know, has been the starting point for many important discussions about sex and intimacy and how they relate to Torah Judaism. So thanks to everyone for sharing this podcast and getting the word out. And we have been growing. In fact, Talli, October 2021 was our biggest month ever, and by a lot. We had over 1,000 more downloads this past month than in any previous month. And it's largely because of you, our Intimate Judaism community, which shares Intimate Judaism on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and so forth. So please continue getting the word out. We also have an Intimate Judaism Patreon site. Patreon supporters get bonus material, episodes, merch, and more. And it's an opportunity for people who have benefited from Intimate Judaism to support what we do. The Patreon link is in the description of this podcast and in the show notes. And in fact, just half an hour ago, Talli and I recorded a Patreon only Q&A session that will hopefully drop next week. So join Patreon and you'll get access to that and much more. Finally, please continue to send us your questions and comments to intimatejudaism@jewishcoffeehouse.com. Also make sure to visit jewishcoffeehouse.com and tallirosenbaum.com. So let's get into our panel, Talli. Can you please explain the genesis of this panel idea?
Okay, so there's a few reasons why we wanted to have this panel. I would start with just inclusion. LGBTQ Jews are part of our community, and we do a lot of episodes that do not relate to LGBTQ individuals and couples. So I think it is important that we devote episodes to all of our listeners and potential listeners. The other reason is that we want to follow up. You know, we have brought up situations, discussed and answered questions related to different sexual identities and orientations. We had Rabbi Benny Lau on our program, and he spoke about kind of like the beginning of how we can begin to be empathic and inclusive. And I think that this is an opportunity today to become more practical. How do we do this? How do we educate with inclusion? How do we deal with and accept and talk about youth that are coming out or want to be able to come out openly? So I'm hoping that today we can touch on this. And then because we at Intimate Judaism often talk about the inherent conflicts between sexuality and sexual health and Orthodox Judaism. We talked about this in several different areas, and most recently we had a podcast on the principles of sexual health and the World Association for Sexology principles of sexual rights, the rights to be in a partnership, the right to experience sexual pleasure, and how there are so many inherent conflicts between the limited way in which halakha sanctions the ability to have pleasure with your partner, and the various ways in which people are wired. And so we want to be able to talk about that in a very real, very practical way.
Today's topic, Talli, like many others that we've talked about, raises an important point that I'd like to make before we begin the panel discussion. We will get to that in just 1 minute. But as a prelude, I think that people in positions of rabbinic or religious authority or leadership have to be cognizant of the nature of what is being asked at any given time. Let me use today's topic as an example. If somebody approaches a rabbi or yoetzet halacha and tells him or her that he's gay, a rabbi needs to know what his role is in responding. He has to listen to what is being asked, because sometimes a rabbi is being asked about Jewish law. Other times he may be asked about, what does God think? He may not know the answer, but that might be the question. Sometimes he's being asked about Jewish hashkafa, Jewish philosophy. Other times he's being asked to be a comforter or a therapist. And a lot of problems come up when we don't recognize, we meaning people who are rabbis or clergy people and so on and so forth, and we don't know what exactly our role is, what kind of question is being asked, and we answer it the wrong way. So that leads to all sorts of complication. If a rabbi approaches every questioner as asking a halachic Jewish law question, then he's abdicating his responsibility to provide comfort or to provide chizuk and encouragement. And conversely, a rabbi who only provides encouragement is abdicating his responsibility to provide the answers that Jewish law dictates. So we can imagine many other roles that a clergy person plays, and many scenarios that arise that require one role as opposed to the other. And herein lies the complexity, and we have to know what's being asked. So using our example today, no Orthodox rabbi is going to say that intercourse between two men, sexual intercourse between two men, is allowed according to Jewish law. And when Rabbi Lau was a guest, as you mentioned, Talli, about a year ago on this podcast, he didn't suggest otherwise either. And I'm not going to suggest otherwise today either. But we're not talking about Jewish law today primarily. We're talking about treating people with respect, how to relate to people, how to integrate people into our communities, and other topics along those lines. And I think that understanding these multiple roles and the different types of questions that we have to deal with is very important as a prelude.
Great. Okay, so I would really like to get started, and I would really like for our guests to have an opportunity to introduce themselves. I think I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourself. So let's start with you, Rachel, who you happen to also be my neighbor. And I don't know if you're going to say this, so I'm going to say this. Rachel is an extremely talented and creative person who has the most amazing voice and began a Facebook group called Ko Isha. Is that what it's called?
I'm the admin. I didn't start it, but I'm an admin.
Okay, you're very active in it, and you
Yes.
sing just amazing. So please go ahead and introduce yourself.
First of all, thank you. My name is Rachel Weinstein. I have 4 beautiful children, one of whom happens to be gay. I'm also a social worker, and I work with a variety of populations from teens to seniors. And 3 of my primary foci are working with people who are coming out, particularly their families, their parents, because it can be difficult. I know from whence I speak. Also people dealing with grief and bereavement and aliyah adjustment. And I would be remiss if I didn't say I'm from Brooklyn and I'm from Chicago.
Both.
Great.
Both, very much both, very much.
A bit of a culture shock.
Yes.
Hence the Weinstein, right?
Yeah.
Yes, but he was Weinstein in Brooklyn too.
And if you went to yeshiva day school, it would have been yeshiva day school. That's important.
That is right. Chicagoans are
Chicago
known
people know
for yeshiva, right.
Right.
But it's still sneakers and it's still soda. I have limits.
Okay. Okay. So
good for you.
Josh, could you introduce yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Josh Brook. I live in Jerusalem. I made Aliyah about 11 years ago from South Africa. I don't say sneakers or pop, actually. we say tackies and cold drink, but that's for a whole different kind of podcast, I guess.
That's a different episode.
I live in Jerusalem. Different episode, exactly. Language and intimate Judaism. I live with my partner in Jerusalem in Katamon in the German colony. I work in the world of communications and journalism, and I don't know. I'm just happy to be here and happy to be here with all of you.
Great, thank you. And Shimmy.
Thank you. I don't have a sneakers or soda joke loaded, so I'm going to skip that. I'm a longtime listener, first time caller, as they used to say in the radio world. I'm a big fan of intimate Judaism, and it's an honor to be here. I'm a social worker, a psychotherapist, and addictions counselor in New York City, and I write and speak as well. I teach at Yeshiva University's Wurzweiler School of Social Work. In my work as a psychotherapist, I focus on issues of family, addiction, and religious and spiritual identity. So when working with Orthodox Jewish LGBTQ clients, so much of the work revolves around the internal value conflict between religion and sexuality, religion and gender, as well as addressing the family and communal pieces of that conflict. And I'll be giving a webinar. I guess this is, Inyan Dioma topical. I'll be giving a webinar for psychotherapists in December that addresses working with these value conflicts in clients and a therapist as well.
Okay, so I think we'll make sure to put the link to your webinar in our show notes. I think that the webinar is primarily geared towards mental health professionals, but anybody who could benefit from what is it, like a 3-hour workshop on LGBT, on LGBT and cultural competence is what you've called the webinar? Great. Okay, so look for that in the show notes. And I'm looking forward to attending your webinar, Shimmy. I hope to learn a lot about working with the LGBTQ population and what you have to add to that. So thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, let's open up the panel. I'm going to ask actually a very quick question before we begin, just because our listeners, I'm sure, are curious about this. And I hope it's not too intrusive, but Rachel, Josh, and Shimmy, Feintuch, so all three of you identify with the Orthodox community, just so I know in general, so you can explain to our listeners.
Yes.
They're all nodding. Okay, good. Just so people know where you're coming from when we ask these various questions. All right. Rachel,
Scott, I just want to say one thing. I'm sorry to interrupt, because we are now doing this live on video on Zoom, and that's going to go out hopefully on YouTube. But many people will be listening on the audio format, and we have 5 people within it. So I think that it might get confusing once in a while. It might be a good idea to say this is Rachel, or this is Josh, or this is Shimmy, so that we know who's speaking.
okay, or we'll call on them ourselves, Talli, perhaps either one or the other, making sure. Okay, good. Rachel, let me open up with you. I want to ask you about your experience as the mother of a gay son, what lessons you can share. Perhaps you can just tell me your feelings and experiences.
So my son, my third child, he came out in the summer of 2014. And in Israel at the time, we were at war, or to be more specific, we were under war. So we were getting notifications of rockets overhead. And at the same time, during that summer, my daughter was dating the gentleman who would ultimately become her husband. So there were lots of firsts. It was, as a friend of ours likes to say, our first war, which sounds horrible, but I've lived in Israel for 10 years. I know it was our first. It was also the first child being married off. So I'd been a mom. I'd never been a mother-in-law. Now I think I have a better grip on that job. And I had definitely never been the parent of a gay child. I worked, when we were in Chicago, I worked in hospice for many years. And so one of the beautiful things about hospice is that you meet lots of different people. So I had met gay, straight, everything in between, every color, religion, creed, whatever variety of person, I had met them. And so one of the things I prided myself on, not only as a social worker, but as a person, was that you learn to be there for the client where exactly you need to be. I wasn't in anyone's house to talk about their sexuality. I was usually there because their mom was very sick, and that's why hospice was in. So I felt like I had some knowledge of more knowledge about things than perhaps I did when they started to show up in my house, meaning I don't want to say, some of my best friends are gay, but I had plenty of coworkers who were gay. I still are. I'd worked with plenty of clients who were gay, but it wasn't in my house. And when it was in my house, I didn't know what to do, because I was thinking like a mom, but I was also thinking out of complete and total fear. My head did go straight to the religious part. Oh my gosh, what am I going to do? There's that pasuk, that verse in the Torah that's pretty clear. I can't bend it. I did call a rabbi friend the night that my son came out, and out of anxiety, I demanded of him, I said, you need to find a kula. You need to find, we have loopholes. We have, ways you can change things for everything. Lights on Shabbos. You need to find me one. He was very, very wise. Shout out to Rabbi Shandalov, and just listened, because he knew I wasn't coming from an actual place of like, okay, I'll give you an answer. He just listened and said, this must be really hard. The night again, the night that my son came out, there were two specific things that jump out in terms of memories. One was that in our marriage, my husband and I have been married, thank God, a long time. I'm the emotions, he's the calm. So if I'm crying, it's just a Tuesday. If he is crying, something's going down. And I'd never seen him cry as hard that night as I had ever. The other thing was that I called my friend who's given me permission to share her name, Joe Brook, who is a friend from Chicago and also recently, or not so recently, made Aliyah. I knew that she had a child who was out in Chicago, and I called her, and we weren't really best buddies. We're closer now. And I believe my words to her were, "This is going to kill me. I'm going to die from this." I granted, very dramatic, but that's the level of angst that I was feeling. I cried a lot. And at our son's request, we were not allowed to tell anybody. He does know later on that I reached out to one person. We weren't allowed to tell our other kids. Our daughter was in the middle of getting married, so we're meeting with, the new family. And eventually he came out to each of his siblings over the course of a year, each of them at a different time. I'm very, very proud of all of them. His youngest brother was a little younger than he is now, and was like, "Oh, really? Yeah. Okay, cool." His older brother said, "I'm still gonna, how brothers speak. I'm still gonna, not quite torture you, but I'm still gonna joke around and tease you and whatever. Like, okay, you're my brother, whatever." And my daughter, who was he was actually a little nervous to share this with, said she broke down in tears and said, "I love you, and I just want you to be happy." I'm going to try not to cry now. So we were really, really proud of all of our kids. I kept it a secret for a while because it wasn't entirely my story to tell. And when I, obviously skipping some parts, but when I came out as the mother of a gay child, was actually in response to someone's totally unrelated to us. Somebody had posted something about love is love, and a picture, a straight Orthodox woman, and her friends, some of them, not all, but some of them came out with this. I don't know why they were so angry at the world, but started referring to the gay community as they and them, and they're destroying the Torah, and they flaunt their stuff, and they in parades, and I don't know, the stars had aligned properly, and I responded. My son at the time was also serving, my son who is gay. I don't say my gay son because I certainly don't say my straight kid. So my son who happens to be gay, he was serving in the army. He was wearing his uniform. He, was a very proud kalban. He worked with dogs. And the reason I bring that up is because I wrote this very impassioned, very thoughtful mama bear kind of response to this woman. And it was to everybody, really. And I said, let me paint you a picture. I'm an Orthodox woman. All of my children were educated for the most part in the same elementary schools. They've all lived in the same house. We're an intact family. Whatever's happened to one has largely happened to the others. So it happens. It happened in my house. It might even happen in one of yours. And I ended it very emphatically by saying that my son, when he wears his uniform, he is proud to defend whoever and whatever, because he's here, he's in Israel. And I said, if you or anybody doesn't like my son because of who he's attracted to, then it sucks to be you. And that's when it just was like, ha! I remember telling him, I came out as the mom of a gay kid. I was like, this is what this closet thing is. And he looked at me and said, you're getting it now, aren't you? Because I didn't know, and I've said this many times, I didn't know we were in a closet. I didn't know. And then when I realized I had like flung the door open, it was incredibly freeing. And then I could go into the process of, okay, this is my family and we need to make readjustments. One last teeny point and then I'll stop is, again, I also got permission to use their names. One of my former coworkers, a nurse, Claire, excuse me, I knew that she was in a relationship with a woman who is now her wife, Denise. And I also reached out to them because they are not Jewish, but they understood. We worked together for a long time, so they got like the head covering thing and the like, oh, you have another holiday deal, and they knew that it was important to me and part of my life and all of that. And they also knew, I think, who I am as a person and as a mom. And I reached out to them and I said, I'm really struggling, and I'm embarrassed that I'm struggling because this is my child. You've seen me work with all sorts of patients. What's happening? And so Claire, whose mother is a devout Catholic, the one thing we absolutely had in common was a very strong belief in God. And she wrote to me, and she said that she'd really struggled. And she said, one thing I know for sure is that God does not make mistakes. And so if this is who my child is, and I very firmly believe that my child is a daughter of God, then this is the way it is. And I need to figure out a way to make that make sense. And I'm so grateful to them, to Claire's mother, and to my friend Joe, because my son is my son. Whoever he's attracted to, that's my flesh and blood. That's my son. And I made it very clear, if you come after him, you come after us. And we've learned a lot from each other. We tease each other whenever anyone says, this crisis in the world, that's, it's the gay's fault. He'll look at me and go, you seriously, you do know it's the straight's fault, right? It's all the straight's fault. So we'll have this joking. We literally do break out in song together. And now we're just a family. We're just us. And it took a long time to get there. So that's that's my story in a very large nutshell.
Well, thank you for sharing and being so honest and open. Josh, I want to ask you, as an Orthodox man who is gay, I'm curious about I want to hear about your reaction to Rachel's comments and what you can add. And perhaps, I hope Rachel doesn't mind my saying this, how it feels to you when you hear that her husband was crying more than Rachel ever saw him cry before, or that she said, this is going to kill me. That must be very difficult for you to hear. What's your reaction to hearing that?
I'll start with something a little bit different, a little bit interesting, maybe to add a little bit of an interesting element to the conversation. I'm the only observant member of my family. So not only am I the only gay member of my family, I'm also the only one who's religious, which kind of puts a slight ease when talking about my relationship with my family and the whole LGBTQ system. In reality, if we are all putting our emotions aside and being like realistic about how the world works and how we are as people, I think Rachel's reaction is pretty run-of-the-mill, pretty standard, pretty real. And it's good that she's not embarrassed of such, because it doesn't help anybody for us to lie to one another. And I think people listening who may be going through the same thing need to understand that at some point there's going to be anger, at some point there's going to be frustration, at some point there's going to be sadness, both from the point of view perhaps of a parent and perhaps from the point of view as well of the LGBTQ individual in your household. My story, as I said, is slightly easier on that end. I remember when I finally came out to members of my family after, I wouldn't say years of struggle, because I never felt that I struggled. It was just more of kind of like, oh, this is who I am, and kind of just like, I'm living my best life. And eventually when I'm ready for other people to know, they'll join me in my journey. I came out late, I think, relatively, if you would, depending on when you look at like when's the right age or the wrong age, or, each person to their own, at the age of 27. But I think that I'm definitely knew that I was dealing with this, spectrum perhaps of sexuality already from probably the age of 22, here and there, whether it was original, it was bisexuality, whether it was, this is actually whatever, I'm attracted to men, like, okay, and that's great. And that's like, just, all of our lives. So like when I came out to my sister, she like jumped and danced, was super excited because she was like, yes, the gay best friend, let's go shopping, every stereotype you can think of. And my aunts and uncles, all very cool, accepting, my siblings as well. My dad, especially, he was like, I think inherently, and Rachel, I don't know if you felt eventually that parents always say that deep down they always knew, like it's never really surprising to them. And I don't know if, you felt that way afterwards or not, looking back, but my dad responded as if he had this speech sitting, waiting for him for 10 years in his back pocket, ready to go guns blazing out with everything. He said every textbook correct sentence you could possibly imagine. And, at the end of the day, we had a good laugh because he said, at the end of the day, I don't mind who you bring home as long as you're a good person and they're Jewish. So, so I think, like all in all, it was a very positive experience. But, just going back to your question, Scott, I think that any reaction at the end of the day is legitimate, because we can't prepare ourselves for things that we're unprepared for, both on either sides of the coin. And whether or not Rachel had known, or either any other parent listening knows, and whether they're just waiting for the day for their child to come forward, or for anyone listening who they are waiting to go forward to their parents, I think at the end of the day, you need to be prepared for everything. And one last little thing I'll add, and then we can continue, is that I think one of my biggest disappointments in coming out is that I never had a fight with anyone. And I know that might sound funny, and maybe Shimmy can understand from a more like a psychological, and Talli can understand from that point of view, is that like at some point you're always prepared for the worst, right? I think that's how we live as people. Like we're strong and we have to be kind of prepared. And I was always waiting for that one person to turn around and say, you Apicorus, or you disgusting human being, or like, how dare you, you're an abomination. And it never happened. And I kind of was like, and after the first time, and the second time, and the third time, and the fifth time, and the 100th time, and then I was like, okay, I guess I'm not getting my fight. And I just have to, realize that perhaps I need to understand that maybe people have grown and the world has grown, or perhaps, I'm in the right circles with the right people who are more able to kind of, understand, or more accepting. Or we can be honest with ourselves here, is that, I'm 30 years old, and I think, Rachel's son's probably younger than me as well, around the same age. And I think maybe our generation is just different, which is the truth. Maybe it's just like, oh, this is who people are, whether they wear kippah and tzitzit or whether they don't. That's kind of like the reality of what we're going through.
May I respond to just quickly to what Josh said? So actually his birthday's tomorrow. He'll be 23 tomorrow. And in terms of did we know, or did we not? There was always, I'll say it, there was a fear. I felt it, but then I would push it back. I mean, there was a period of time, he will absolutely kill me for saying this, but he was absolutely infatuated with Taylor Swift, but so was the rest of the planet. I distinctly remember that he was going to have her convert and be my daughter-in-law, and I thought, that's not going to happen, but okay. So he seemed like super straight. I never thought of it at that time, as we all get crushes on pop culture people or whatever. But there was one moment which I have only shared, and he knows, shared years after, when he was 3. You don't tell anyone you think your 3-year-old is gay, because they're going to look at you funny, and you'll probably deserve that look, because kids are always trying on different personas and identities and all of that. So, boys dressing up as their mommy for Purim is not so weird. But he was 3. And I remember he just moved his hands like this, not uncommon, not unlike I do, or my husband. And he just moved his head and his body in a certain way. And there was something that went, there it is. And I shoved it as far down into my toes as possible. So I can't say I've known since you were 3, but my struggle started before he even knew what a struggle was. That's not to say mine's better or worse. It's just very different. I sensed it. I sensed it at that age, but I surprised when he came out, but not in the I never saw this coming, more the whoa, we are really dealing with this way. So.
Okay, I think we're gonna move on. I'm gonna move on to you, Shimmy, but first I wanna thank you both. Rachel, you were incredibly moving, and I'm glad that I've got my tissues here with me, because really I was moved to tears listening to you. And it really, the empathy that you can have in your work helping other families go through this, from the perspective of having this empathy for your own child, and also for yourself, or for other parents. I think that brings something really, really special to the work. And Josh, I'm very happy for you that you have had such a turmoil-free journey, and you're very lucky to have parents who have been affirmative, gay affirmative in their lives. I'm going to turn to you, Shimmy, with a little bit of a different picture in my own reality in my work and in the communities that I grew up with growing up in, you know, the 70s and the 80s and just, well, okay, the 70s and and the attitudes that I grew up with around being gay. And I think that, you know, certainly the kind of like quote unquote denial that Rachel, you talked about in a little bit of a way, you know, you were attuned to your, you know, when you talked about the day he came out, obviously, and I'm sure you can talk more about this, Shimmy, it's not really, you know, coming out is an entire journey. It's not just something that happens overnight. But I think that what I'd like to hear about from you in terms of your work and the kind of experiences that your clients and patients have, that you see in the families and the family dynamics that you work with. I can tell you that I've had many people who have been through, there's two kinds of things. There's one that many people have been through all kinds of, you know, conversion trials, conversion therapies, and have done everything they can to just not be gay. And so there's a lot more coming into therapy because there's been such a long struggle with the denial of one part of your identity. You know, this idea of trying to hold two identities. Certainly the idea of being able to do both is new. You know, it just was that obviously if you're going to choose it once was that if you're going to choose to be authentic to your identity and to your sexual orientation, then obviously you're going to have to choose to lose your identity as an Orthodox Jew. And thank God, you were saying, Josh, maybe it's the, you know, the venue and the community that you live in. Thank God that in the liberal modern Orthodox circles, it is becoming easier to be accepted as gay and Orthodox. Like my friend wears to the gay pride parade in Jerusalem, my friend Dahlia, who's also a therapist. You know, we're queer, we're here, and we're machmir. I love that t-shirt, it's really funny. Machmir meaning particularly stringent on the areas of Jewish law. My question to you, Shimmy, is about the all of the above, as well as the demographic that you work with, and also what do you see happening in the Haredi community? Because I think that is probably far more difficult to reconcile being gay with living a Haredi lifestyle. So you can choose what you want to address first.
Thank you. That's a lot. I want to thank first Josh and Rachel for bringing your authenticity to this space, to this conversation. Without us trying to check in with who we authentically are and being able to bring that, this whole conversation doesn't work. I see all these struggles as conflicts in different identities. You know, there's identity in sexuality. We haven't talked much about the trans community, gender identity. You know, it's kind of like the lost sibling in the LGBT space. You know, but there's just, when we talk about gender identity, when we talk about identity as a parent, when we talk about identity as a religious Jew, you know, it's fascinating to me, Josh, that you've chosen this identity of Orthodoxy along with sexuality. So that's, you know, I have definitely had clients who have been in that situation and have said to themselves, why am I doing this? Why am I choosing this? So I look at all of these as, these are all different values. All of these values are valuable, and we can't just choose one without looking at how it impacts the other. So it's really not, you know, this kind of binary of, you know, well, are you violating that particular halacha, or are you going to, as there's this documentary out now, are you going to completely deny your sexuality and marry straight, even if you're gay? If someone can jump in, I'm forgetting the name of the documentary. But
Marry
it's
Me
wonderful.
Forever, Rabbi Vardy.
Marry Me, however.
However, yeah, sure.
Yeah, really, really wonderful and striking. And please do check it out. So I kind of exist in a lot of spaces. I grew up, let's call it very, very yeshivish, very right-wing Orthodox, and I have a lot of friends, a lot of Facebook friends that will be relevant in a minute, who are very much in that world. And I'm mostly in the liberal Orthodox space right now. I live in Washington Heights. I'm the president of the board of a shul and a gathering space called the Base Community, which is very welcoming to all Jews and especially Jews of the LGBTQ plus identity. So when I moved here a number of years ago, I started to become more aware. And what really changed things for me was realizing that it's about the awareness, it's about the empathy. I had a moment where someone from this organization, JQY, Jewish Queer Youth, asked me to post a fundraiser on Facebook. And I said, sure, posting it. And within a day, I had gotten 2 phone calls from heads of organizations, one a referral organization, one a professional organization, saying that they no longer wanted to be associated with me for posting a fundraiser. So it was a real shock to me. And Josh, I can give you their phone numbers if you're looking for a fight. It's right there. And I over time really took up that mantle and will share things on social media, and I'll get a lot of different reactions. From the more liberal space, I'll get likes and loves, and from the more right-wing yeshiva space, I'll get a lot of challenges, a lot of anger. And the one thing that the common denominator in those anger responses, because I do at times engage and really try to have a logical discussion, the one factor that's always missing is empathy. Every single time, my go-to question has been, have you ever met an Orthodox Jewish or a frum gay person? No, I have not met one person who responds with anger and actually has had an open and honest and authentic conversation with a gay person, with a queer person, with a genderqueer person. So if we're not engaging, if we're not talking, of course it's only anger, it's only intellect. It's up here. I'm pointing to my head for the audio audience. It's up here in the head, and it's not down here in the heart. I do that with clients a lot. Like, oh, that's okay, that's up here, that's intellectual. What is it down here? What is it in the heart? What are the feelings? When there's no empathy, there's no conversation. So that's Aleph base, that's ABCs. We need to be able to listen. When people are so fixated on halacha, and not to talk down halacha, right? This is a podcast hosted by a sex therapist and a rabbi, right? We're going to talk about halacha. But when we're so fixated on that, that's because there's no room for heart. There's no room for empathy. We haven't opened up. Rachel, your story with your rabbi, where you demanded an answer, right? You said, give it to me, give me the answer. And the only response was empathy, which is so wise, because that's what's needed. So to anyone who's listening, who's saying, oh, but what about halacha? Or, it can't be, there's this problem and that problem. We need to talk about, this is a reality. This happens. Talk to somebody, find somebody like Josh, find somebody who has Rachel's experiences, and talk it out and start to realize that this is not getting shoved down to your toes. This is not getting pushed away. This is something that happens, and to try to have an intellectual conversation is denying that it exists. A lot of my rabbis, my Rebbeim, I went to yeshiva for many years. I would ask them, it was all about questions and answers, and there was one rabbi who always said, I don't answer hypothetical questions. I don't speak with theoretical, because when we're talking about a halacha question, we're talking about a Jewish law question, you need to look at the person in front of you. So we need to start with that. We need to start with the person in front of us. Some of the clients I work with, there's a lot of talk around value conflict. I've had clients, a number of clients who identify as gay, let's say, and have been in a straight marriage for decades and have children, and are kind of living this lie. There's a value conflict right there, right? What about the values of connection? What about the values of marriage and the values of being interested in your spouse?
So Shimmy, I'm gonna cut in just because this is great, and I think you're giving us such wonderful information. I do want to have the opportunity to ask some more questions, and I do want to get back to you as well, also about and maybe Scott, you want to go first, and then I'll go after.
Okay, sure. I just, Shimmy, you said so many important ideas. One of them that really resonated and made me think is a question which you implied, and I want to direct it towards Josh, when you talked about conflicting identities of being gay and Orthodox. And Josh, I'm wondering about your experience and what that's like, and how you're able to navigate that very difficult journey.
This is like the question I get all the time. They're like, I don't understand. The Torah hates you. God hates you. I'm like, I don't know if God hates me. Have you asked him? Her? Let's rock the boat. No,
all the way on that one.
Yeah.
Right.
Take him down. No, but it's difficult because I'm in two minds about it, right? On the one hand, I understand. Okay, there's a pasuk in the Torah that doesn't look like, agree with the lifestyle. But do we understand fully what the purpose of the pasuk is? Do we understand how we want to interpret that? For those listening, the pasuk, from the pasuk means like a sentence from the written Torah. And it's interesting when you look at it, because on the one hand, if I believe solely in Hashem, if I believe in the concept of God, if I believe that I was created by God, by his ideas, by, in his image, then clearly this challenge, if you will, this lifestyle, this who I am as a person is intended. It's intended to be what it's meant to be. So if I believe enough in God and his way, then that's possibly, that's one way that I choose to look at it, and I do look at it. A friend of mine once said to me, he was like, well, I don't keep all 613 mitzvot in the Torah. So, if you keep all 612, then this is your one thing you get wrong or right or whatever. It's like, it's how to grapple with it. But for me, the more important thing is that like, I just love Judaism. And I can't like not, like I love going to shul on Shabbat, and I love putting on tefillin in the morning, and I see the erech in keeping kosher. I might not make mincha every day, but I'm saying the point is that like, it's just like, I couldn't imagine a world where like, I have to just be like, oh, I can't do this anymore. I can't live my life the way that I want to live it anymore, just because like I'm attracted to, who I'm attracted to, me and my partner, we go to shul together every Shabbat. We both daven in the morning, and we keep a kosher home, and we have, like Shabbat meals, and we build a sukkah, and like, and the fun part comes in when the fact, that I keep 3 hours and he keeps 6, and I eat Kitniot and Pesach and he doesn't. I'm waiting for the response for a rabbi to turn around and be like, how do we deal when there's two male heads of a household? Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that side of Judaism. Let's talk about the beauty in like what it can be being in like a, like some interesting things. I said, I'm waiting for that tshuva. The minute I have that tshuva, then like, we can
the answer to
forward.
That, Josh, is very easy. When the woman and the man are the two heads of the household, then the man and the man can also be the two heads of the household.
Exactly. And I think the idea is that like, I can't wake up one day and be like, I'm done with it. And I tend to tell people, and this is totally, each their own, and I'm obviously not putting words in anyone else's, mouth in the LGBT world, but a lot of the people that I know who are choser b'sheila, who leave being religious as a result of their sexual identity, there's something deeper. There might have always been something there that might have pushed them. And I use this as an example as well for like, there's this idea that if you go to the IDF, you kind of stop being religious as well. Most of my friends who went to the IDF and stopped being religious, it's kind of the IDF was a nice, easy excuse to stop being religious, right? And I think that on some level, and obviously I'm saying I'm not deciding for people because I understand there are people that struggle and they come with these from communities that it was hard for them. And, they can't grapple or they can't have this outlook that I have on the Torah. And that's totally sultan. But a lot of times I don't think it's as clear cut as like, oh, I woke up this morning, I'm ready to embrace my LGBTQ identity and I'm not willing to engage Judaism on any level. And my partner's also, he grew up in a non-affiliated conservative leaving household. He decided through Hillel in college to become religious. He's also religious. His parents eat bacon, and that's, the world we live in. And so we're a little bit of an anomaly, if I don't say so myself.
Wow, that's a really interesting answer. It's fascinating to me that it seems that everybody assumes that, wow, Josh must have a really difficult time with dealing with that navigation. And you're like, what? I think that's very admirable. If I can follow up, Josh, I want to ask another question though. You talked before about not having a fight and you're kind of waiting for that fight. And this also relates to what Shimmy was saying. There's a difference between not having a fight and being openly welcomed. Right. So I'm curious if you've been openly welcomed into Orthodox communities or the Orthodox communities of which you've been a part, or it's been more of a struggle in that sense.
I think it fits into two categories. I definitely have rabbis from yeshiva who clearly love me and care about me, but they can't address or broach the topic. So they just kind of like dance around it, like, how are you? How's life? What's new? Like, what I'm saying? There's no like, and they're like, warm towards me and they see me and there's no like this like pushback. There's been experiences where I've seen people over the years who didn't know, like, haven't seen me in a few years. And I knew them from like synagogue and these kind of things. And then, I introduced them, oh, this is my partner, whatever. And there's that moment of like discomfort. They're not really sure how to deal with the whole situation. That I think there's a difference between being welcomed openly with open arms and being pushed away forcefully. And I still don't feel like I've ever been like pushed away by, kind of any community. More, I've kind of like been in situations where it's been slightly less comfortable, if you can, put it in those layman's terms. We go to synagogue, as I said, we go to an Orthodox synagogue here in Jerusalem. For no reason specifically, or more than like it's close to where we live / I happen to really like the rabbi, and he's on board as much as I can understand. He's had us at his house for Shabbat, and he I don't know what he feels deep in his in his heart of hearts, but I think there's a level of between being a community leader and separating your like what you maybe feel, as Shimmy was saying as well, as how we have to look at it in two different things. Like we look at it from a religious halachic point of view, and we just look at it from the human point of view. And I think, I've never I don't think he's going to get up in shul and be like, rah, rah, rah. And I think from the general community, like people in the shul who, have understood from the situation that, we arrive at shul the same time every time we leave together. I think, it's kind of like Hamev and Yavin kind of situation, those who understand. We don't wear pride, pins on our lapels to synagogue. But I'm saying, like, I think the people that know and understand this people community invite us for meals, kiddush, like it's really, I think it just has to do with the specific people. Either, it's really hard to pinpoint. But as I said, it's definitely not everyone's experiences. And, there's been a lot of press, especially over the last month. There was a lot of like pushback from certain communities in Jerusalem who asked an LGBT man to, step down from the bima because they didn't feel comfortable with him leading tefillah. I also don't generally push myself to lead tefillah sometimes. I think, and I apologize if I upset anyone by saying this, but I think that like there's a time and a place sometimes, and I don't feel that I always need to be the person who's trying to rattle the cage. I don't think that I always have to push myself like, oh, I want to lead tefillah dafka because it's a reason, like I need to like make a stand. I think, like it's fine for me to be who I am. And I think also on a personal level, not everyone that you go to shul with, you ask them what happens in there, behind closed doors. I don't think I want to know, who everyone's going to bed with at the end of the day. I don't think that's super important to my ability to be part of a community.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, thank you. I think we're close to having a wrap up. I do want to say that listening to you, Josh, I think that I'm wondering about what our listeners are thinking, and I would like to address our listeners, because I do think that what we brought here is almost an ideal picture of, how things can be, with intent, with mindfulness, with empathy, with, just chemla, compassion. We could really, in a not very difficult way, have a very nice integration. I really appreciate what you talked about in terms of your ethics and your values as a Jew, because as a therapist, what I've seen are people who get married, gay people who have same-sex attraction, and they get married as they struggle with their same-sex attraction or their addictive same-sex attraction behavior. They are in a marriage, they are bringing children into the world and going out and hooking up with guys on the side. That's the way that they express this side of them, in a very kind of split off, unintegrated, and frankly, not very Jewish, values-based way, and not in an integrated way. So the idea of being able to incorporate the ethics of monogamy and the ethics of exclusion and other sorts of rituals that I'm sure that many gay and lesbian, I know lesbian couples who use the mikvah, and they other sorts of ways that they can merge their senses of self. I also want to address our listeners, because there may be listeners out there. We have a lot of a diverse audience. We also have young people who listen. So if you're a young person and you believe that you are trapped in your identity, in your orientation, or you're confused and you don't quite know how to navigate, I think it is important. There are resources. I know that there's Eshel in the States, and there are lots of resources here in Israel as well. And I think we can collect those and put them in our show notes. There are therapists such as Rachel and Shimmy, and I also deal with LGBT, and there are many colleagues here in Israel. So there's a growing network, Talia Roth, there's a growing network of therapists who are affirmative towards gay and are not trying to push any kind of agenda one way or the other. I also would like, and maybe you can help with this, Shimmy, if to send a message out there to parents as well. I think that we've been able to address community, and we've been able to address a little bit about inclusion, maybe not that much, in schools. How do we meet the needs of LGBT, particularly trans? That's because we have a very gender separated kind of experience, shul-wise and everything else. How do we begin to become more inclusive? How do we deal with the voices that you talked about, Shimmy, of the anger, which I see as fear? I see that as fear of the slippery slope and the changing, there's a lot of fear that it is woke culture that is creating all of this. And I don't think that it's woke culture that's creating all this. I think that there is some aspect of inclusion that it doesn't make people gay. It just makes the people who have been gay and hiding not have to hide as much. So what message would you have, Shimmy, for parents? Because I think that we gave a lot of validation to the experience of parents, but I've also worked with parents who were pretty stubborn about believing that this cannot be, and that there's got to be a way. And I'm wondering what advice you would have for parents who may be listening, who have a gay child, or believe that their child is really just going through a phase. What might you say to them?
Yeah, well, just to name, clearly Rachel has been through this with experience and works with families and parents as well. There's a mourning process that needs to take place. There's sadness, there's anger, and part of mourning is anger, part of grief. So, as well as denial, right? Just this doesn't exist. Bargaining, there has to be a way. You named all the stages of grief there. So, a lot of that counseling is normalizing, saying this is okay. This is what anybody would feel at this moment, and please do feel these feelings and move through them, allow yourself to feel it, write about it, talk about it. So that's a body of work. And the other piece is what I said before, whether it's families, parents, schools, we need to listen and have empathy and awareness. It's baby steps. So wherever you are, if you're at the stage of don't even mention the word gay, you know, I remember when I was in 6th grade, there was an uproar because the non-Jewish math teacher said the word gay, and there was a whole to-do, you know, and you know, for weeks and weeks. Or if you're in a more liberal space and it's about, okay, well, a kid comes out as trans, and what does that mean for, can they be in this one gender school? You know, and I'm told that you know, there may be some further podcast discussion about this in a different episode, you know, because it's kind of its own body of work. But one baby step from where we're at, there is more listening, there is more moving away from denial. This is here, we need to deal with it.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'd like to just ask to close it up for each one of you to be able to say one more important point that you would like to bring home as we conclude this very informative. I've certainly learned a lot and have had a lot of feelings today. So Rachel?
I have 3 points. I'll make them as quick as humanly possible. One is that it is, on the tails of what Shimmy just said, it is okay to mourn. You know, we have a picture of what our children's lives will be, even if we're not aware of it. And, you know, the dream of walking my son down to his bride, or vice versa, or whichever way, that dream's gone. And that was sad. And I didn't even know, I knew I had it, but I didn't really consciously focus on it. So if you're a parent who is listening, it's okay to be angry, to question, to be angry at God. God and I had some words in the beginning of this process for me. And it's okay to not be entirely on board right away, because to quote to loosely quote an updated version of One Day at a Time on Netflix. Anyone who knows the show will maybe know the episode. This is something that our children or ourselves have been either dealing with or struggling with or thinking about for years or months, certainly a lot longer than in the moment when we find out as parents. So it's okay that you're not cis boom buying immediately. Give yourself that grace period. Don't stay there, but be kind to yourself. With that, it's important for parents to know, and this is the clinical piece for me, is that the rates of death by suicide or drug addiction or homelessness all go up exponentially for children who are not accepted and allowed to either live in their homes or be who they are in their homes. And there is support. I lied. The 4th point is just quickly that in terms of the possibility of children killing themselves. For me, the moment that this was clinched, not that I ever thought I was gonna, abscond or not abscond, but just give up being my son's mom. The summer that he came out, at that particular summer, there were 3 boys in Israel, may they all rest in peace, who were missing. And the entire country came together. And it was an extraordinarily sad and emotional and just all the feelings kind of period of time. And we all heard the 3 boys. I happen to also have 3 boys. So the phrase kind of resonated in a different way for me too. The day that the news broke that those 3 boys were unfortunately, that they had been murdered. And then shortly thereafter, there were the televised funerals and these unbelievably broken families. I remember looking at the moms, and we all saw a lot of the moms in the media. And I said, these moms will never be able to touch their kids again. They won't be able to hug them. They won't be able to hold them. They won't be able to tell them, clean your room and do your homework, right? The only thing that they can touch now is marble, is a stone, that commemorates where they're buried. And I realized, I have this child who I love, who drives me just as crazy now as he did before I knew he was gay, but I have him. And that he is one of my 4 biggest gifts in this world. And that's an opportunity that I take very seriously, and I refuse to give up. So
thank you. Thank you. Josh?
I think to finish off, I'll say 2 things. Firstly, I understand, and I think it's important for people listening and people knowing that I have a good story, and I'm very lucky that I have a good story. And it's not that every person, can go forward and say, well, there's probably people listening be like, why would they choose this guest? Well, why can you bring someone on? They want, where's the tears and the hatred and the, the burning of the Torah? I don't know, like, where's that, like, that anger and that, disrupt? And I think the point is that, like, maybe this is the story we need to start hearing. Maybe we need to, like, start saying that, like, just okay to be who you are, and it's just okay to be happy, and it's okay to want that for yourself and for other people, right? It's okay to, like, be like, I made this huge decision to be who I am, and, like, I should be happy about that. I should be able to, benefit from that for myself, for my community, for my future, for my family. And if anyone is listening, be it a parent, a child, or whoever it is that you have to kind of, envision. When I said it's kind of funny in my head, but it's the reality of the thing. Is like, the only reason that I got to where I am now is because I was honest with myself, and I was able to do what I did. And I think that's, like, the huge part of it, is that, like, yes, I can't promise you that your parents are going to be happy, and I can't promise you that your siblings are going to be happy, and I can't promise you that your best friend is going to talk to you ever again. But I could say it's a possibility that all those things won't happen, and that everything's going to be good and it's going to be fine. And the only way that I found out that everything was good and fine and happy and who I am, and, and living my life the way I'm living it, is because I took that moment where I took myself, like, pulled myself towards myself, and I said, okay, this is what it is, and let's go forward with it. Just for reference, I did my coming out in a period of 3 weeks. I just ripped off the band-aid, just, like, made a list of people I wanted to tell, or made a list of people I wanted to make sure that they heard from me, and then the rest I let the people just talk, and it happened, and it was great, and it was wonderful. I also met my partner shortly after, like, my big reveal to the world. It was kind of very well planned. And then from then onwards, it's been 2.5 years that we've been together. It's just kind of like, people who don't know, I just introduced them. I was like, this is my partner. That's great. And if that's the way they found out, even better, because, it just, it's the reality of things. So if you're at home and you're listening and you're, like, not sure what to do, the only way you'll really know is if you give it a chance. And at the end of the day, there might be some obstacles and there might be some hurdles, but you have to think of the long game. What's going to make me happy, whether it's a year from now, whether it's not speaking to my parents for a month, whether it's crying, with my best friend. At the end of the day, like, me being my best me is the next 120 years of my life. That's maybe more important than the few months of struggle or the rest of your life of struggle, if you don't let yourself be who you truly want to be.
Thank you. Thank you, Josh. And Shimmy, any last words?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all. To people who are struggling with your own sexuality, identity, just to go off of what Josh was saying, please do come forward. There are many, increasingly more people who are welcoming and open and warm and empathic. And don't push it away. Like with feelings, I know this is the stereotypically therapist-y thing to say, but like with feelings, you can't push them down. They don't go away. They just come out fiercer and sideways. So talk about who you are, go through the process of learning more about yourself. And if you're on the parent side, or the not yet aware of a family member or friend who is LGBT, then I would just say, notice the feelings that you're having, ask questions, be curious, start listening. If that's your starting point, it will only be positive.
I love that. I think that's to just be curious, notice what's going on with yourself. I mean, that's good advice for any kind of relational situation. So I really appreciate that. I'm going to give a shout out to, I was talking about some names of therapists, and there are many in Israel. I'm going to be speaking to my colleague friend Shulamit Sperber, who I'll be asking her to provide me with a list of the resources for anybody living here in Israel. Her sister, Abigail Sperber, actually started Bat Kol, which was one of the first organizations for religious lesbian women. And they are the daughters of Rabbi Daniel Sperber. So just a shout out, and please look at the show notes for the resources. Thank you so much to our guests. And Scott, I'm sure you want to close things up.
We have our standard closing. It would be a shame not to do that.
Yeah.
So the listeners expect
Go
it. They want to
for
be
it.
entertained, but definitely Shimmy Feintuch, Rachel Weinstein, Josh Brook, thank you very much, all three of you, for joining us
you.
today. This was very important.
It was
I think
great.
the
It
listeners
was great.
will really get a lot out of it. Anyway, as I always say, check out our website, intimatejudaism.com. You can find a lot of good stuff there. Make sure you share this podcast. Make sure you join Patreon. There's lots of good stuff, including our new Q&A we just did. Write to us, intimatejudaism@jewishcoffeehouse.com. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, and follow us on Instagram, Intimate Judaism, as well as Talli Rosenbaum. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Stop recording.